Hey everybody, Chris Bober here with Team Bober at Nebraska Realty. Thanks for joining me today. It is March 22nd, 2024, and we are less than a week out from kind of a bombshell that dropped last week with the National Association of Realtors, NAR, right? They had a huge settlement that has created all sorts of kind of a feeding frenzy, especially in the media. And I publish stuff all the time, and I really just want to put it out there that not to believe everything you read. And if I show you some of these headlines that are out here, give me a second to add this to this. But you look at some of these lawsuits that are out there, and if I just put in NAR lawsuit, I see these headlines that how the Department of Justice paved the way, what the settlement means. A $418 million settlement, standard 6% commissions dropped. All these things that are out there. The reality is, none of that is factual. Okay. So don't believe everything you see, and read online. The standards have changed for what is truth and what isn't. Most of it's really to get more clicks, more likes, more presence online. However, part of this, what we've been told as realtors is there are some things that are going to change up a little bit. And I wanted to demonstrate just at a high level of some of these changes that you're going to see coming. So these are supposed to be implemented July 1st, but there are some practices that as realtors, it's going to look a little bit differently. And what I'm going to show you today is, number one, realtors have always had the best interest of the consumers, right? The NAR is meant to protect home ownership, and they do a really good job of that. And there's tons of evidence of that. But basically what's going to happen is some things are going to change. And as consumers, as clients, really, you're not going to see a ton of difference, but there are going to be some different things out there. And here's the best way that I can explain it, right? So every day my wife and I live over in Elkhorn. So we live right by Indian Creek Golf Course. So I just Googled the directions from Indian Creek to Nebraska Realty. And as you can see on there, the highlighted blue that I'm showing right here, that's the route I take. It's the best route, I think, right? I go down Maple Street, go to 180th Street, which is wide open, 4 lanes, and I turn in on Burt and I take the little frontage road that takes me to our office. Now, my wife, she likes to go 192nd, right? There's a little bit less traffic. Right here at Blondo, it's a tough turn against the traffic, so I don't go that way, but this is the way she goes, and she comes in and then gets to our office and arrives at the same destination. As you can see, there's probably 4 or 5 different routes you can take here to get to our office from our neighborhood. And my point in showing you this is, yes, the route and how we get to a real estate transaction, helping people and represent them as a fiduciary agent to have their best interest, it's going to change a little bit. The route's going to change a little bit, but we're still going to get to the same destination. We are still going to represent our clients and serve our clients under our license as a fiduciary in the best manner possible that is in the best interest of our clients. So that's not going to change. And I'll show you a little bit about what is changing. So I talked about some of the practices that are going to change. And here's a couple examples. And again, there's a lot that has to be determined, but there is a method that we know is going to change a little bit that, again, if I didn't explain it to you, you probably wouldn't know much of a difference, but I wanted to highlight kind of what these changes are going to look like. And then as we go on in the following days, weeks, and months, when we have figured out exactly how they want us to do this, again, it's not implemented till at least July, then we will have more factual data. But now this is kind of the bullet points, the high point here. Okay. So the first thing I want to understand, and you've seen it now, one of the practices that the realtors have agreed to change is how commissions are disclosed. Okay. And the best way I wanted to use is this screen here to illustrate and understand the flow of money. And the best way I can describe it is to say that now commissions that are paid to real estate brokerages are going to be decoupled. Okay. Now, to understand that, let's highlight right here the current system, what we've used for a long time, right? This is a system where a seller hires a listing broker to list, market, and represent them in the sale of their house. And just clarification, real estate commissions are not set anywhere, right? It has always been negotiable. And it's my job as a listing agent under my listing brokerage at Nebraska Realty to demonstrate my value. And I go into a listing appointment. I demonstrate all the things that Jen and I do at Team Bober. And then they say that for this service, our charge is, in this instance, 6%. just so you know, I've charged more than that and I've charged less than that. It really is specific to each individual property, and also the time, the market, all these different factors come in. But we demonstrate our value, and then our clients see that and they agree to pay that. Now, remember, we don't get paid this 6% up front. We only get paid if the transaction consummates and gets all the way to closing, and then out of the seller's proceeds they will pay the listing, the total commission, right? So this is what's changing right now. Let's just say it's a 6% listing. Right now, that money comes as a debit on the seller's closing statement. Has nothing to do with the buyer as of right now. So the buyer is bringing money for a down payment, and they're going to pay off the mortgage. The settlement of that, the net proceeds, what comes out of those net proceeds is the total commission. That gets paid to the listing broker, right? So at Team Bober, Nebraska Realty receives the 6% of the gross sales price. That then is split. Usually it's about 50%, right? There's different situations where it's different, but let's just, for ease of math, say that it's going to be half of it, 50% is going to go to the brokerage whose agent represents the buyer, right? And right now, in order to earn that cooperating commission, then they are the ones who draw up and present the contract. And as realtors, we've always believed in mutual compensation. We want to share. And it's, in fact, in our code of ethics that we have to offer not necessarily compensation, but we do have to cooperate in our MLS with buyers brokers. So that's what we do, right? We list a property, we offer a cooperating commission to the buyer's agent, who does a lot of the work, holds the deal together, brings the clients, represents them, negotiates for them, all these things. Then after closing, once Nebraska Realty receives the total commission, they will pay out the cooperating commission to the buyer's broker. Then, of course, from that, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but the listing broker then will pay the compensation to the listing agent and the buyer's agent. And again, it's not the 100% of what it is. So I'll explain that some other time, but believe me, 3% is not coming to Team Bober when they list a property. We have a lot of expenses. Okay, so that's the current system, and it's been very fair. But what I think the lawsuits have kind of come out and said is that because the buyers are bringing the money to the transaction, they need to have a little bit more of a disclosure about how much their agent's making, how much their brokerage is making, and it needs to be out in the open more. So great. Now, again, under these systems and what these changes are coming, just so you know, as realtors at Team Bober, Nebraska Realty, we have always been very clear and transparent. Our clients know 100% of where the costs of what they're doing, what we're getting paid, what the title insurance, state documentary tax, settlement fees, all these things. Our job is to educate them on those. So we actually will show a payout and estimated proceeds before we even sign a contract, right? So we have totally believed in this. Now they've changed it to where now the buyer is going to be able to see that side of it too. Okay. Under the new system, the proposed system, it has to be approved, but this is where when we decouple commissions, this is what I'm talking about. So the seller will still meet with the listing broker and their agent and agree on a compensation model. And again, our job is to demonstrate that value. Now, what's different here is the seller is going to agree to the compensation of what they're going to pay the listing broker, not the total compensation, right? So again, I'm using a very easy math here, 6%, right? So I go to see Mr. Seller. Here's everything we do. Here's our estimated pricing. Here's all our things. Would you agree to list the property for 3%? Okay, they say yes. We sign the listing agreement. Now, during that, we also have a talk with our seller about the benefit of compensating the buyer's broker, right? Where before up here, we had mutual cooperation that we were agreeing to do that within our listing agreement, and then within our MLS agreements, we were cooperating commissions. Well, they removed that now. We can't have cooperation in the MLS. Now, the seller gets to decide how much they're going to concede to compensating the buyer's broker, right? Again, this is two different routes, but we're still getting the same destination here. The difference, right? The seller and the listing broker have an agreement to pay out the listing side of the transaction. The seller will also have an agreement now about how much they want to cooperate with a buyer's broker. So now, instead of the listing broker up here paying the buyer's broker, the seller is going to be another debit on their closing statement to offer a cooperating commission. Now, this can happen a few different ways. The seller can agree to pay the buyer's commission. The buyer can agree to pay it, or it can be a combination of these two, or because, in all fairness, the seller can offer to pay none, right? And then we're going to highly encourage our sellers to cooperate. But you can see how, again, if everything goes to plan, then the listing broker and buyer's broker are still getting compensated. It's just now decoupled, where the seller was paying the listing broker paying out. Now the seller's paying the listing broker and then potentially paying the buyer's broker. Also, the buyer will potentially have to kick in there too. Okay. So you see how the decoupling of commissions is getting us to the same destination, just a little bit different route. Okay, so I hope you understand that right there. The other big change that came up is that we are now requiring, and a requirement, and I think this is fair, especially since T-Mobile does this for the most part anyway, is the buyers, in order to be represented and work with a buyer's broker and their agent, they will have to sign an exclusive buyer's agency agreement. Now, if you go and look at T-Mobile and look under our listing system, and I'll pull this up right here, right? So if I put in T-Mobile, right, and we go to on our website and we go, let's get started, and we're going to go to buy a house, right, just under our thing. So we have a VIP listing system where in this system, our 3 requirements is to get pre-approved, which is always smart, to attend a buyer's counseling session where we disclose and show our value and what we do. And then our 3rd requirement is to hire T-Mobile, right? We have an exclusive buyer's agency agreement that now we called it a buyer loyalty agreement before. Sometimes this is done with a handshake, but you as buyers are now going to be required to hire your agent, and it will be contractual. And the way to understand that is that within every transaction in real estate where there's a buyer and a seller, there's 3 contractual agreements that could come up. Okay. If you go through the traditional method of listing your home with a real estate broker and then using a buyer's broker and their agent to sell a house, you have 3 agreements and now 3 contracts. The first one is the one that's always been there. The seller, the parties in this one is the seller and the listing broker. So when you sign a listing agreement, you're creating a fiduciary relationship with the property owner and the listing broker. In our case, it would be Nebraska Realty. Now, the representation and facilitation of the services is done by the listing agent, right? Those are where we go out and we measure, we take pictures and video, and we market the property, we negotiate, we help hold the transaction and negotiate through the management of the transaction, and then we help them get to closing. Okay. The contract for that is a listing agreement, right? It's been around forever. The difference now is that the commission, like I talked about before, will be decoupled and it will not be paid from the listing broker to the buyer's broker. Now it's going to be paid directly. Okay. The compensation in this instance is to the seller, right? The seller is going to be compensating over to the listing broker. Okay. Now, this is not a new one, but it's a little bit different, is the contract between the buyer and the buyer's broker. Right. So as a buyer, as a buyer's agent, we have always been required to get a buyer's disclosure signed where it highlights and demonstrates the services that we provide as a buyer's broker and their agent. But it was just a disclosure. It wasn't a contract, right? When you were the buyer's agent under a brokerage that facilitates and helps represent the buyer, when your representation came in the form of having the disclosure signed and then being the one to write and submit the contract. And the buyer's agency agreement now has always been around, but now it's going to become mandatory. Okay. So the buyer and the buyer's broker are going to have to enter into a contractual agreement to represent them. Probably a good thing, right? Because it lays out the terms, it lays out compensation. The compensation to the buyer's broker can come from the seller, it can come from the buyer, or it can come from both. Okay. So that is the 2 agreements in both representation from a buyer and a seller's perspective that are now going to be mandatory. Now, at the bottom, of course, there's another contract that happens in a transaction where it's the seller and the buyer. That's the purchase agreement. Okay. So there's a legally binding contract. It's complicated, and I recommend that you have a buyer's broker and agent and seller's broker and agent to help facilitate that and represent you in that. But that is a contractual agreement between the seller and the buyer. Now, the representation of this contract is handled, and the facilitation of it is handled by the title and escrow company or an attorney. So in Nebraska, we use title and escrow. Other states sometimes use attorneys or abstracts or things like that. But then the compensation for those services are paid out of the closing statement from the seller and buyer. The example of those would be title insurance, updating and reviewing of abstracts, but there's a cost to that. So as you can see, we are creating a very clear and linear contractual relationship between the seller and the listing broker, the buyer and the buyer's broker, and then the seller and buyer. And this is a clear outline of who represents them, what is the contract that represents that, and then where does the compensation come from. So I just wanted to put those out there just as a means of here. All right, so I'm coming back in. I wanted to just give you a high level explanation of two of the changes that we know that are coming, right? The first one is the decoupling of commissions. And the second one is going to be the required exclusive buyer's agency contract that must be signed to work with the realtor. Again, the first slide I showed you was we are taking different routes, but we're still getting to the same transaction. So I hope this clarifies a little bit. There is a lot that has to be determined. There's a lot of legalities in changing the way we're doing business. And that's concerns mostly how us as realtors, us as licensed fiduciary representatives of our clients, there's license law, there's fair housing, there's truth in lending, there's all these things that regulate what we do. And as licensees, we're bound by statute and law to follow them. By changing this, we've changed a little bit, right? So the attorneys and the people get paid to do that. Our association, our state, our brokers, they have to figure out exactly how we're going to get there. And we have a little bit of time to do that. But we do know these changes are coming. The really good thing about these, like I pointed out, these are practices that us at Team Bober, Jen and I, have always followed. Now they're mandatory. So I guess you could say that the market's kind of catching up to us, which I think has prepared us over our entire real estate careers to handle any changes that come up. And it's funny how the changes that are coming up are what we consider best practices. So we hope you appreciate this. If you do have any questions, the link is right over here to teambober.com. I will post this video, our blog. We have tons of great information on our website. We will continue to put information to educate and empower our clients to make great real estate decisions. Our handle is at Team Bober, Nebraska Realty on all of our social channels. So we will continue to share and educate you guys and hope that if you do have any questions, just reach out and call us. And when it comes to making a decision on who you want to represent you in both the sale and the purchase of your real estate, we hope we demonstrate values that you call us and give us a shot to try to earn your business. So Chris Bober, and again, Jen, me and my wife, Jen Bober with Team Bober, want to thank you. And we are here to help answer any questions. And we are still going to be doing business as usual, serving our clients with authentic hospitality. That's what we do. We'll continue to do it. We look forward to helping you guys out. Thanks again. Give us a call if we can be of any help.